Hey y'all, Zach here from World of Game Design, and it's high time we talked Alan Bahr's Tombpunk. This is another small indie RPG that I've fallen in love with. You might recognize Alan from Gallant Knight Games, where he produces the much more popular Tiny D6 system, which we'll eventually cover here on the show as well. Tombpunk, though, is nice and punchy at the moment. There's not a lot of it, unlike the sprawling behemoth that the Tiny D6 system has somewhat become. Tombpunk is much more focused, and this is exactly why I chose it for my next How to Play. In the same way that Dead Halt captured the gonzo 1990s themed delight in a perfect little system, Tombpunk scratches my itch for dungeoning on a budget. If I had to pick a rules-light, OSR-inspired fantasy system to play out my old-school feeling fantasies, I think this would be it. So you ready to take a peek? All right, let's do it. In Tombpunk, quote, the odds are intentionally stacked against you. The government, out to get you. Random monsters, out to get you. The forces of chaos, out to get you. But just because the world's a mess doesn't mean you have to be dour about it. It's a high-action, high-octane, rules-light dungeon crawl adventure with a couple of twists that make it its own little beast. The first twist has to do with gold, or coins, in this game. You need coins, not just to buy new gear, but also just to stay alive. You need 1 coin per week just to stay alive, and then 1 coin a month for adventurer's tax, and another coin a month to the local lord. And the only way a non-landowning adventurer gets coin is by delving dungeons and hauling your loot back out. Literally, you must risk your own life raiding crypts and caves or face certain death by starvation. That's your motivation. It's great. Everybody's on the same page. You're not doing it for God or king or country. You're doing it for bread. You get an average of about 4 coins per dungeon for the whole party, or something around there. So you're going to need to clear a dungeon or 3 or 4 every single month just to keep up. So you better get to it. The second thing that makes Tombpunk unique is the dungeons. It uses a system of light and darkness. You, the adventurers from the surface, bring light and you quell darkness. Every dungeon has a darkness rating that it starts at, and your light rating is equal to your party count. Every time you beat a monster or clear a room, you roll a d8 against your light rating. If you roll under, the dungeon's darkness level goes down by 1. Once it's at 0, you've cleared the dungeon for now, and you can safely haul your coin back to the surface. The dungeon will still recharge darkness at a rate of 1d3 per month, so eventually you can come back and clear the rooms again. I like the idea of running this with a hex crawl, with dungeons on some hexes being more difficult and or farther out and requiring travel time. The party might get some quick coin from a nearby starter dungeon, but soon they'll be forced to raid the Death Knight's chambers, or put in a long hike to the coastal caves. Between these two systems, coins and darkness, I think your party will feel Tombpunk is distinctly different from most rules-light RPGs out there today. There's desperation and opportunity, and there's no leveling to ever get in the way of this or make it so that just surviving is taken for granted. Weighing risks and sometimes coming up wanting is part of the game. Do we stay in this dungeon and push our luck with the hope of securing the coin, or do we lose time and head back to the surface, make camp for a bit, and lose a coin in the meantime? Delicious. Alright, so in brief, you'll be making 3 types of rolls fairly often. Attribute tests, resource tests, and damage rolls. Attribute tests are similar to ability checks from D&D, and you'll be rolling a d12 and trying to hit or fall under your given attribute score to succeed. When the GM wants to make a test against your character, they'll have to roll higher than your score. So players want to hit or fall under when they make a test. GMs need to beat it in order to do something against you. Resource tests, the second aspect, roll a d6, and they always succeed. But every time you roll over your current resource value, you reduce that value by 1. This is similar to how the Alien RPG manages resources, and I really like it. It's clean and it doesn't get in the way. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. Damage is tied to the class you choose, not your weapon. This is a bit odd, so listen close. In D&D, each class's hit points, or hit dice, can be anything from a d6 to a d12, and that's determined by your class. Sorcerers are d6s, fighters are d10s, etc., etc. Your starting equipment, gold, and special abilities are also tied to your class. Here in Tombpunk, we're going just a step further. Now, your damage dice and attribute scores are also tied to your class, which makes choosing a class very important. Alright, so if classes are so important, let's take a moment and look at what the classes are and how those attributes and resources work on a character sheet. First off, let's just take a moment to admire the simplicity of this sheet. There is very little here, and we should be able to read it pretty quickly. Profession is for your class. Might is a mix of strength and constitution from D&D, and it determines your ability to hit with a melee weapon and also how much health or lifeblood you've got in the can. Grit is a nice catch-all that works as your magic stat and your willpower. It's also the stat that keeps you alive when you drop to 0 lifeblood. The only other attribute is deafness, which is straight up dexterity from D&D and is your ability to dodge or make ranged attacks. Again, as a reminder, anytime you want to make an attribute test, just roll a d12 and compare it to your own score. If you hit the score or fall under, you succeed. Anything above is failure. The next line is for resources. There are 3. Courage, coin, and will. Coin is the simplest of these, and you use it to buy stuff or pay off debts, as outlined above. I like to think of courage and will as 2 sides of the same coin. Not coin, but more general coin. Whatever, they're similar. I distinguish between the two by saying that courage is your ability to stand up to physical, mortal threats, and will is your ability to withstand threats more spiritual or diabolically horrific in nature. Most often, monsters will call for a test of these 2 resources, one of these 2 resources. When that happens, roll a d6. If you roll above your resource value, you're cool. No change. If you roll under, reduce your score by 1. Hit 0 in a resource and bad things will happen. Lifeblood is health points. Armor reduction comes from, you guessed it, armor. Anytime you take damage and you're wearing armor, you get to reduce that damage dealt. Special abilities come from your classes, which are how we started all this. In the core game, there's 3 classes: warriors, shepherds, and ritualists. Warriors get lifeblood equal to might plus 10, a starting courage of 3, and starting coin and will of 2. Their attacks do d10 plus courage and damage. Shepherds get lifeblood equal to might plus 8, a starting courage of 3, coin of 1, and will of 3. Their attacks do d8 damage. Ritualists get lifeblood of might plus 6, courage of 2, coin of 4, and will of 2. Their attacks do d6 damage. All classes get special abilities, which are outlined further in the book. It's as simple as that. And the special abilities aren't excessive in nature. You can make a dozen warriors, and they're all going to look exactly the same from a mechanical standpoint. There's more classes available, though, if you pick up one of the setting expansion books like Nightfell or Rogues. The final piece of the puzzle is combat, and it's decidedly brutal, but with an epic twist. To start combat, have each member of the party roll a deafness attribute test. All characters that pass go first, in whatever order they want. Then all monsters go. Then the rest of the party. Follow this result for each round. On a character's turn, they can perform one action. and moving is an action. Since this is more of a theater of the mind sort of a game, I'd say moving should probably be something more than just, I take 3 steps forward to be able to place an attack on the Goatman. Rather, it's, I think, supposed to be more like, I move from this room into that one. Or, I place myself in between the Goatman and the Cleric. The beast will have to get through me first. When you want to attack, just make a might attribute test. If you succeed, you hit and roll damage. Armor reduces damage dealt by 1, 3, or 5, depending on the heaviness. If the GM wants to attack a player, they roll against that player's deafness attribute. Simple as that. All damage is subtracted from lifeblood. Go to 0 lifeblood and you'll have to start making grit tests. This is where the twist comes in. If you fail your grit test, you're gonna die. But you can still do your action. This allows you to get that last moment in the spotlight. I really like it. If you succeed on your grit test, you can keep on fighting, but you remain at 0 lifeblood. You could, in theory, roll many successful grit tests in a row and stay on your feet for a very long time. But the likelihood is you'll die pretty quick, and when you do, you will know ahead of time and you can make it glorious. What you should experience are fights that resolve quickly and are simple to adjudicate. You'll be fighting a lot in this game, often several times in an evening if my suspicions for your table hold true. It might be wise to cook up a couple reserve characters for the evening, just in case. You never know when someone's going to bite the dust. That's it, folks. That's the video. There's a few resources out there for Tombpunk. I mentioned a couple of them earlier on, including an expansion setting, alt-themed RPG called Rogues, centered around rogues. You can also grab the core book and most any of Alan Bahr's Gallant Knight games or Outland entertainment stuff by visiting Drive-Thru RPG. I'll put some links in the show notes. This book is stupid cheap too. I think you can pick up the PDF for $10 or a print copy for $20. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our channel. We have a lot of great content and different playlists all centered around getting you into more RPGs and making those games better. We also have a podcast. It's called Geeks Can't, and it features myself and a couple of my Yahoo Game Master friends chatting about topics that came up at our tables, Kickstarters, RPG news, and interviewing creators by the dozens. Go give us a listen if podcasts are your thing. It's also recorded live right here on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook every week. You can expect a video like this about a different system every few weeks. Until then, we'll see you next time.